Okay, hey, this is Jesse from Orthogonal Research Education Laboratory. That's me in Seattle down here at a recent event. Today I'll be talking about lab and organizational tools. And we're going to talk about some specifics like communication hubs, taking notes, open science, sharing, crediting, version control, and also our sort of lab practice of helping to develop tools for researchers. But it will all kind of be under the thematic umbrella of collaborating with a distributed lab. So why do I start with that? As you may have already picked up looking at things in the open house, we're a little bit of a unique situation here. We have we come from a bunch of different backgrounds in different places, different time zones. We have postdocs and we have undergraduate interns all in the same general place. And we are dealing with being distributed by design. And I give a lot of credit to Bradley for setting up the lab this way. It's kind of a virtual space where a lot of really cool things happen. But with that in mind, a lot of our tools have to kind of be with our unique style of collaboration in mind. So asynchronous editing is a big deal. And we try to make them as open source as possible. At least have a lot of accessibility in the things we do and create and how we do them to some extent. And then notice the OSF website for later on. We'll come back to OSF. GISD is essentially our version of Zoom. It's open source. It's occasionally moody, but it gets the job done. Here's a picture of me having a very large smile because Bradley at one point dropped a surprise mind map on us, and that was a unique and fun moment. But we can you can usually share screens and do everything that you do on Zoom. So that's cool. Slack's our main discussion platform. We have channels that are specifically about either events or topics or research banners or some of our subgroups. But Bradley will talk quite a bit more about this in another video if you choose to see it. Discord is a bit for special interests. We have one on critical periods. We have a few that are, tailored to more specific discussions. And Discord and Slack both have different takes on being open source or different payment plans and how it affects they store information and so on and so forth. So we're always keeping that in mind for the future. And again, check out Bradley's talk in the open house playlist on Slack and Discord if you really want to get deep in the weeds about that. But we do keep an eye to the future about different ways of talking, collaborating. Neuromatch, a group we have a lot of ties to and have collaborated with a great group of people, is looking at their own Mastodon server. Maybe we'll work with them or make our own one day. This is another image of Gisty here, but we also have considered some things. We do work in different virtual reality settings at times. And what about being able a meeting space there, or using just Gisty or other websites in an online or a virtual reality sense? Those are all fun things we think about. So next, we'll talk about Notion, sort of our main information and database, and where we share a lot of ideas and notes. You can kind of see on the left here, I have a bunch of reference materials. These are papers and these are books and chapters and things we want to specifically talk about. And on the right, we kind of have a little bit more information about them. This is a nice setting. This maybe makes it a little more clear that if here's one view where you have kind of a standard left sidebar that can disappear, and you can have a collection of our meetings. In this case, we have a bunch of we have reading groups. That's a bit of a typo there. But Cognition Futures Reading Group, Saturday Morning Neurosims, an AI ethics discussion group at MIT that we've attended. Also, Google Summer of Code meetings. You can kind of see underneath the meeting notes tabs. You can see all meetings. I think you can see my cursor, but Google Summer of Code and different groups there have different meeting setups. And if you click on a meeting space here, you can have all these different links. We put our videos on YouTube, as you probably can tell. And what's cool about Notion is there's a lot of interlinking. This would take you to an actual hub for or a document a page for this specific paper. Another paper is linked here. There's notes below and images and PDFs all stored in Notion. It's quite a nice way to do it. So we could have used Notion as our main place to store all of our notes, but it's not the only way we do things. I was really into Obsidian MD, which is a great tool for taking really, really nicely interwoven notes if you want to get really detailed about your management. This is a great way to do it. The only trouble with Obsidian for me was that it was a little tedious to put things in and get them out. It does use Markdown, which is a great highly variable language within which you can put things. Your Markdown files, you see README files all over GitHub, which we'll mention later, and other places too on the web. But it's really great, and I do recommend it. But it's kind of like your personal brain if you want to store stuff there. It's a little bit harder to get things out of it, and they are continuously updating how they're doing that. But for collaboration, it's kind of interesting to point out, like it kind of gets in the way of some of our shared efforts for taking notes and sharing notes. So something to keep in mind. We also use MarginNote, which is what this app is. It's a nice app. I mostly use this when I'm doing reading groups and sharing notes, because you can kind of really nicely map out some things and select different chunks of text or topics or ideas and highlight them and create links between them. It's a nice thing to do. But we continue to look at many iOS or Android or even Linux, based things. We're always looking to find the best way to do things, but we keep that in mind. Yeah, and as far as GitHub goes, we've used GitHub a lot. We'll talk a little more about it later specifically. We use GitHub for many things, in terms of project management, even storing files as a way to kind of keep a big open source accessible database. But we've mostly switched to Notion for the time being. So most of our notes are here, but our outputs and our deliverables and the things we output, we are kind of fall into this category a bit. So now I'm going to talk more broadly about open science, sharing, crediting, version control, and more. You kind of have to start the conversation with archive. What is archive? It's a place to store preprints or postprints. It's not a peer review place, but it's a place you can put some output of yours. It's basically a paper specifically, and you get a unique identifier. You can have people who cite it and reference it, and it's a nice way to get feedback. And it's a lot more. You can really generate a lot of useful feedback with your ideas when you put something on the archive or have a nice preprint set up somewhere, and it can really hasten and speed up the quality of what can be a grueling publication process. Open Science, this should say framework. I'm actually going to change it now. I wonder if it will update live when I change it, which is a cool thing about how I'm doing this. We're on Open Science slide. Is it changing? I don't know. I don't think it will. Let me see if I can go out and come back in. There we go. I won't do this for every slide, but just to kind of demonstrate real-time asynchronous editing. I actually edited it on a different computer because I have a slide up in there, but that's the cool thing. You can, that when you have a bunch of people who are distributed, you can do that. That's sort of what we aim for. So again, it will be wrong on the next slides, but for the sake of this, that was sort of fun. So Open Science Framework and the Center for Open Science, you'll recognize this from the start of the presentation, is a group of people really trying to help researchers conduct rigorous research and share their work more openly. And it's definitely something, as you'll see in a few more moments, that's increasingly important and emphasized and looked at for, yes, graduate applications and more increasingly more so grants and other funding opportunities. Like, do you make your data um, accessible and open? And are you trying to make your what you're doing rigorous and reproducible? Figshare is sort of what do you do with the stuff that isn't a finished paper or a preprint? Well, you can make it like this, and this is Bradley's Figshare website. Really cool collaborators over here, obviously. Um, but you can kind of see a lot of it's a way to basically store these are mostly presentations here. This is one that I was recently involved in. You can kind of put the presentation here. You can get your unique identifier, the DOI. I forget where that was. And you can see the history tier too. But if you want to cite it, it gives you all these different options for it. There's a DOI. Here's information. You can. I think I have a few things here, but yeah, I'm a co-author with Bradley, and I'm pretty much a lot of my stuff. But it's sort of a way to store and get credit for and share and help contribute to scientific or philosophical discussions about uh, you know that isn't necessarily a paper. And what do you do with the nice presentation you made, or a figure, or a visualization? There are ways that's important to keep track of too. Um, and of course, there's GitHub. And if you don't know about GitHub, you will. It's a major code repository, but you can also use it for some like project management. You can use it to host websites. GitHub is doing quite a few. They're always trying to be innovative and help people either write better code or collaborate in code or develop new ways of using a version control, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. And we've used it to store these epistemological directories, is sort of a collection of knowledge maps. It's a place where you can store files or images or PDFs of things. We have some repositories about just like materials or proceedings or the pamphlets and the agendas from conferences and events. So GitHub is sort of you could have a whole video, and there are many videos on what GitHub is, but it's definitely something that we've used. We use it mostly for its intended purpose now for coding, but there are definitely a lot of different ways you can use it. And I do want to kind of close this section by emphasizing there's big changes coming in terms of how at federal levels we in the United States and like Germany is also quite advanced in this area, and other places are really pushing for open by default, open by design. I happened to attend this today. A major neuroethics lecture at Neuroscience Society for Neuroscience 2022, and this whole this was a really nice lecture about the history and the motivations behind neuroinformatics, behind trying to make neuroscience data more accessible and reproducible and more rigorous. And it's a pleasant thing to do, and there's a lot of good moral reasons to do it. But now, like, there are major changes ahead that this is going to become much more of a priority than it perhaps has been. And particularly early career researchers, one of the things from the talk that the speaker mentioned is, graduate students are kind of on the front line of this. Like they're going to be, shifting this conversation from it's a tax on my time. It's if I make my effort reproducible, it's a waste of my time, and I'm going to be losing my, I'm squandering my time and effort if I make it reproducible. Sort of the old mindset where they're trying to move past to no, this is going to give us it will have some learning a curve or startup costs perhaps, but if you can buy into it, it will be better in the long run in terms of just functionality, but also because major changes the NIH um, will be pushing this forward, and this is a big topic. And what's really nice about the lab is like we're really open about these topics. Like what are the political factors and trends that are shaping how we do things, methodologically or otherwise. So that's a bit of another conversation, I suppose. But it feels quite appropriate to at least mention it in the context of everything that we are aiming to do in the lab. So I'll close on this topic of developing tools for researchers. We have a history of trying to think about how to best do that or innovate things. We care about building different kinds of, knowledge databases, and we have specific, not quite micro courses, but collections or curriculums that we developed about different topics. And we emphasize that. We also mention it in our professional development and how we deal with bringing people into the lab, preparing early career researchers, talking about, frankly, about issues at hand. About you're going to need to know this. You're going to be dealing with these pressures. You're going to have an incentive, like talking about being savvy to open data or open science or data reproducibility, data sharing, right? That's part of our professional development, and there will be another video on the internship program in general and some of what we do there. So stay tuned for that later in the open house. But I'll kind of close mentioning specifically Frontier Map. It's a tool for early career researchers navigating interdisciplinary research. We've been developing kind of slowly over the last couple of years. We had it at a CSV conference, which is sort of a data management organizational documentation related conference. Talked a bit again recently about in collaboration with Frontier Map and Cognition Futures in general. We mentioned at the international workshop on embodied intelligence and kind of moving in that direction. And it's sort of a template for or a guide for people to start looking at, okay, it's important to pay attention to these things, like debates in a field or how ideas have evolved, the trajectory of different, hegemonic structures within fields of study, and why certain things develop or don't, and where ideas maybe have been slipped through the crack, or where ideas have been celebrated. Like a major concept that many of us will run into is the idea of like AI winters and summers, like when AI has been really well funded and a lot of hype behind AI. Right now it's definitely, well, it's perhaps crested from deep learning is going to save the world into, which was sort of the big idea for the last decade, into maybe we need different, more hybrid models again. The endless rivalry between symbolic and sub-symbolic things in AI or neuroscience and cognitive science stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that this is about. But it applies to many different. It's a Frontier Map itself is discipline agnostic and also platform agnostic. Although I've built out some things, yes, in Obsidian and also in Notion, that are sort of tools that will help people go through these processes. So without going too much more into that, I would just leave you with the question of what tools will benefit your research aims. Have you been a part of lab environments that have kind of shirked or avoided developing data management practices? Have you worked a lot with like neurodata? Have you worked a lot with sociological data or qualitative data? What have you found has been useful for that? A lot of people still just live in Excel sheets, but maybe there are better ways to do that. And I really like that in this lab we have a lot of openness about that conversation. So that's it. That's a quick run through of all these things. We're happy to always talk more about them, and hopefully you find that interesting and have some ideas to share with us. And thank you for your time today. Hope the open house is going well for you. So I'll leave it at that, and take care. Bye-bye.